All right, time to button up this Shaw custom stereo Thang that came in. If you saw the previous video, link in the description below, one of the things I needed to change was this filter cap and its mount. The can clamp had been really deformed when customs inspected it. And one of the reasons it deformed was whoever put this in, I don't know whether it was Shaw or a subsequent tech, they had number 4 screws holding the bracket in place, and the number 4 screws did not have any washers. And so you had a very narrow screw with a hole slot in the bracket that was just barely less narrow than or narrower than the screw. So the screw was just grabbing a very small portion of steel on either side, and also there was very little support in this dimension, very little surface area. So when there was stress on this from someone hitting it or whatever, it just deformed these little rings, and the metal here on these flanges kind of cupped and started to pull through the screws. So I took the old one out, and I neatened up the holes to the correct size, 9/64 in the US, for some number 6 screws, which are mounted on number 8 washers to give a larger surface area there, and these are very secure. So new filter cap, new filter cap clamp, I can't talk, new filter cap clamp. While it may seem like a minor cosmetic thing, each one of these rear jacks had been mounted with a fiber washer on the outside. So they had the ferrule, the metal ferrule, and then this black compression ring, and then a fiber compression ring, and then the chassis. On the other side was just the hard plastic of the jack. So all the compression was just on this side, no compression from the other side. So all of these were very loose and could not really be tightened. So I put the fiber compression washer on the other side of the chassis, and then put these back, and then they have the plastic compression ring here. So now this side compresses, the other side compresses. There's pressure from both sides on these, and they're very tight. And they look nicer too, because that fiber washer is supposed to be on the inside, not the outside. I'm doing this video in the sequence it's more convenient to film because the chassis is already in this orientation, but this was actually the last thing I had to do on this amp. The right output was extremely low. The left output was very strong and very nice. It had an old quad of RCA EL84s, but they weren't particularly well matched, and one pair was in fact dead. I took them to Tube Depot. They confirmed that one pair was just measuring as duds. The other pair was good, but they didn't have anything that was an exact match for that old pair. So the owner is getting the old pair back separately, and he has a new quad of these JJs, and it's a matched quad, and the amp is sounding fantastic. As the amp came in, it had 3 good alpha pots for the treble middle bass. The volume and left and right master volumes were crappy pots. I took out the 3 crappy pots. I enlarged, professionally enlarged the chassis hole to accept a 3/8" bushing pot. It's got a new alpha here for the volume, and rather than having 2 individual master volumes that are really hard to match to each other, and the stepped ones, unless you spend an awful lot of money, you're not going to get any accurate matching with stepped ones. So I put in a dual gang master volume here, which I've confirmed on the scope it's very consistent. There's not much difference between the tapers or the values. The left and right output scale together very well. And then they gave me the room here where the old left master volume pot was. I put in a 3-position switch, and it gives you off for no bright cap, a 250 and a 100 for 2 different levels of brightness. Now, 250 can be an awful lot if you're talking about a Fender circuit traditionally, but this amp doesn't have a ton of gain. It's got the octal preamp tube, which has a good amount of gain, but it's not a raging gain monster. So for some sounds, to get at a volume that you'd actually want to use in the room, you may want to have this volume up around 2, 3 o'clock. You're still clean. It's just a very loud clean. And 100 picofarad cap doesn't give much benefit when you're at 2 or 3 o'clock on the volume, because that's how the bright cap works, or in that case doesn't. So I have a 250 you can switch to. So if you're running this thing at about 2 or 3 o'clock on the volume, it's going to have the sound similar to a Fender with its bright cap on, if you want that. But if you run the volume on this thing down at 9 or 10 o'clock, like we would do on most Fenders, 250 can be a bit much, so there's the 100, and you can also turn it off if you prefer. So it gives a lot of flexibility and makes sense of this hole in the chassis that would otherwise just be a dummy plug. So I put all this stuff together. I was feeling pretty pleased with myself. I put everything back, all the tubes back in place. I powered it up, and I had a crushing moment of disappointment because there was a really nasty hum. And while the signal was coming in behind the hum and the volume pot affected the level of the signal, it did not affect the hum. And I could take a ground wire, clipped to the chassis. And if I touched it to the input of this volume pot, the hum did not go away. If I touched it to the wiper, the hum did go away. Even if I had the wiper tied pretty high, like at 4 o'clock, almost all the way up, there was enough resistance that if grounding here did not mute the next stage. And I went through, and it's a rat's nest in here. I finally found the cause. Drove me nuts. It was this cathode on the triode that this wiper feeds. This cathode ground is now here to this bus bar. As the amp came into me, the cathode ground was being made down here to this terminal strip. And then after I discovered that was the cause, I measured, and this terminal strip is like a few ohms, or just barely over an ohm away from the chassis. It's not a true ground point. And in this point in the circuit, it was enough to cause this tube to not bias correctly and go on no matter what I did, until I moved it to an actual good ground in the correct sequence for the circuit. So if you're going to use a bus wire like this that goes from the input all the way to the other end, you can't see it on the camera here. I've showed it in the previous video. It's down at that end. All the grounds are going over by the power transformer, but they're connecting to this. And this was the lone ground that was being made to a terminal strip as opposed to being made to the bus wire. If you're going to use a bus wire, be consistent. Don't use terminal strips for grounds. Or if you're going to use terminal strips for ground, be very consistent, but know that over time they will weaken, the connection will weaken, they will get dirty, they'll become less reliable, as this one very much did. But I was glad to see that the fix was that simple. Here's a quick shot of the wiring on the new filter cap. That was, just to prove that I left everything at least as good as I found it. It's still a rat's nest in here, but it's a functional rat's nest. And when chasing down the hum that was present before, I found it was just that one cathode ground. I suspected that something might have gone amiss in this DC heater circuit. The octal preamp tube in this amp has a DC heater. There's a big bridge rectifier down here and 10,000 microfarad of filtering for that. It was also wired up to the old indicator lamp that was using that as a ground reference. In fact, the DC side had a ground reference, and that was the only reference for the entire heater supply, was to ground pretty much through the old indicator lamp, which was a LED, which had a resistor in series with it. Not the way to do it. So in the course of troubleshooting all that, I discovered what they had done. I replaced some 18 gauge solid wire, heater wire, to that octal socket with some 22 gauge. There's no current for a 6N J7 or whatever. So the 22 gauge is fine, and this was able to dress more neatly, have less strain on things, and that allowed me to install some heater balance resistors from the octal socket on the DC side to ground. I could have done this on the AC side to ground or the DC side to ground. In this case, I did the DC because I had good access here. You cannot do both. You have to be very careful how you do your ground references when you have a DC heater installed. Anyway, it's working now very well. Per the owner's request, the old little round LED indicator was changed out for the red Marshall style, the square. You saw some silicone on the other side. That's because this square clip-in, push-in thing was designed to have a slightly thicker chassis because they're expecting there to be an acrylic front plate. So the front plate of a plexi style plus the metal panel is just a little bit thicker than this aluminum chassis. And so this had a little bit of wobble to it, though is overall very secure. So I just put a bit of silicone on the other side to help this not rotate. I cannot make these switches be more flush to the chassis because they'd be hitting things on the other side. It's so crammed in there. And once again, this amp was originally built as a head, so that's why the labels are down here. And so this would have been off on the volume. This is actually almost all the way up on the volume now because it's being used in a combo, like a bassman, a tweed Fender hang down combo. So that's off. That's pretty much the range you'll usually use it, though it does sound very nice when pushed. And so you got that. You've got a 3-position, no 100 picofarad, 250 picofarad bright cap there. Master volume affects both outputs. And then treble, middle, bass, and I've got those noon here. Let me put this back in the cabinet and let you hear it real quick before it goes home. All right, pretty simple amp, but it does have 2 different speakers because it has a left output and a right output. On the right side, there is a G10CS from Warehouse, which is a smooth cone 10-inch. On the left, there is a Retro 10, which is kind of like a small vintage 30, kind of, sort of. I've got the 57 on that. I've got the Royer on that, on the smooth cone, to kind of bring out the characteristics of each one. And I've done a pre-recording test and made sure that they're time aligned so that if you hear it in mono, it's not going to cancel any frequencies. So bass, noon, middle, about 10 o'clock, treble, almost to 1 o'clock, volume to about 2 o'clock, master volume all the way up. And we're going to start with the bright switch off. So no bright switch at all. Kind of dark. Bright switch at noon. So that's 100 picofarad. With the volume up here at about 2 o'clock, that's kind of a neutral. And then if you want to have a bright cap, the sound of a bright cap with the volume that high is 250 picofarad. Now that's with the volume all the way up here. If you turn the volume down to where you might use it on a Fender or other amp that we're more familiar with, which is usually have a higher output, then that 250 is really bright. So here's without any bright cap. Really dark, that's why I wanted to add this. Here's the 100 picofarad at that same lower volume. Then if I go to the bright 2, it's maybe a bit too bright. But honestly, this circuit doesn't sound that great with the volume down here. It really begins to wake up and be more useful and interesting here. So basically you can have it as a darker sound, a flat sound, and a slightly bright sound. And then you can control the output level with the master. So here's master on 10. I'll put it back up to full. There is a bass cut switch down on the back of the chassis. Someone else added that. So here's without the bass switch, with the bass not cut. And with the bass cut. So that's pretty dramatic, but if you're using this with some high gain pedals, that bass cut could be your friend. As far as with the bass full, you can thin it out even without using the switch. And you can go all the way to, ooh, that's bassy. A lot of good range of control. And as far as the treble goes, let me put the bright switch to the middle. Now the builder used a linear taper pot for this as opposed to a 30%. Actually, I think they used, no, I'm sorry, they used a 10% audio taper versus a 30% J taper. So kind of flat is here about 1 or 2 o'clock. Well, you put it at noon, and it's quite a bit darker than a Fender, which has the log tape. J-tape, or rather. So while it's the Fender tone stack, the pot tapers aren't exact on the volume and treble, and the circuit, due to the nature of the octal preamp tube being used, is quite a bit different than even just the normal channel of, say, a deluxe reverb or super reverb. It doesn't have the air, but it sounds good. And if you were to use stereo effects with this, which I've not set up, you'd hear the stereo more. What I am going to do is just play a little bit, and I'm going to mute the left speaker, then I'll mute the right speaker, and let you hear each one individually. If you're listening to this on your phone, and you have your phone vertical, it sums to mono. To hear stereo out of most phones, you have to hold them in landscape mode to get left to right separation. So I do recommend headphones if you really want to hear this thing, or real speakers. So that's what this thing sounds like now. I think it sounds really nice. It looks cool. It's unusual. And while I'm not always a big fan of, hey, I've found this old organ, let's turn it into an amp, the previous two builders did a good enough job that I didn't have to do any crazy heavy lifting. Anyway, thanks for watching.